High above the quiet town of Mount Sterling, Kentucky, in the old hilltop cemetery where the wind moves through rows of weathered stones, there stands a statue of a man who once held the power to decide the fate of others. A judge. He stands tall in bronze, a notebook pressed against his chest, a pen resting in his hand. But there is something strange about the monument. The statue does not face the town he served. It faces away from it, away from the courthouse, away from the streets where he once walked as one of the most respected men in Kentucky. And once you learn what happened to him, that detail starts to feel like a silent accusation. Because in the spring of 1884, that same judge was beaten in the streets of Mount Sterling, whipped in front of witnesses, humiliated in public while the town watched, and when people demanded he take revenge, he refused. 10 days later, Judge Richard Reid was dead, and the question that still echoes through Kentucky history is this: did the town destroy an honorable man, or did the culture of honor destroy him first? Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to Kentucky Melody, where we uncover the strange, forgotten, and sometimes heartbreaking stories hidden in the hills of the Bluegrass State. Tonight's story isn't folklore, it's real history, and it's one of the most tragic stories ever recorded in a Kentucky courtroom. Richard Reid entered the world in Montgomery County in 1838, in a Kentucky that still belonged to the old antebellum South. The Civil War had not yet begun. The nation was still uneasy but intact, and few could imagine the conflict that would soon tear it apart. By the time Reid reached adulthood, however, Kentucky had changed. The Civil War had come and gone, leaving behind a state divided in loyalties, bruised in spirit, and struggling to rebuild its institutions. In that uncertain era, communities looked to the law for stability, and men like Richard Reid, educated, disciplined, and respected, became the kind of leaders people believed could restore order. That was the world in which Reid built his career. He studied relentlessly. Neighbors remembered him reading late into the night by lamplight. When he entered Georgetown College, it quickly became clear he possessed an extraordinary mind. He graduated first in his class, studied law under respected mentors, and soon established a successful legal practice. By 1882, the people of Kentucky elected him Judge of the Superior Court. In those years, that title carried enormous weight. A judge was not just a legal authority. He was expected to represent wisdom, restraint, and moral character for the entire community. On April 16, 1884, Judge Reid walked into the office of a fellow attorney in Mount Sterling. The man was John Jay Cornelison. At first, the meeting seemed routine, a discussion about legal matters. But, according to contemporary newspaper reports, Cornelison suddenly accused the judge of damaging his reputation. The accusation escalated quickly. Before Reid could react, Cornelison raised a heavy hickory cane and began striking him. Witnesses later said the attack was vicious. Reid tried to escape the office. He staggered toward the street, but Cornelison followed him outside, and in full public view, the violence became even more humiliating. Cornelison began whipping him with a cowhide lash, again and again. The streets of Mount Sterling filled with stunned onlookers as a sitting Kentucky judge was beaten like a criminal in public. It wasn't just an assault. It was a spectacle. And in the culture of the 1880s, public humiliation like that could destroy a man. Within days, the story spread across the state. Newspapers from Louisville to Lexington ran headlines about the shocking attack. But the real question wasn't what had happened. It was what Judge Reid would do next. Under the Southern Code of Honor, there was an expectation. A man who had been humiliated so publicly had only one respectable option: violence. Many expected Reid to challenge Cornelison to a duel. Others believed he would simply hunt him down and kill him. But Richard Reid chose something very different. He chose the law. He refused to retaliate. He refused to duel. He filed charges and allowed the courts to handle the case. To some people, that decision was noble, but to others, it was unforgivable. One editorial reportedly called him the most consummate coward that ever trod shoe leather. In a small Kentucky town, words like that spread quickly, and once a man's reputation fractures, it rarely repairs itself. But the criticism wasn't only coming from the newspapers. In 1880s in Kentucky, a man's honor belonged not only to himself, but to his family. His humiliation became their humiliation. Historical accounts suggest that even inside his home, the emotional strain was unbearable. Many believed retaliation was expected, that a man who had been whipped in public must restore his name with violence. We don't know the exact words spoken in those private rooms. History rarely preserves those conversations. But the monument his wife later built tells us something powerful. It tells us that even after everything that happened, she believed he had been betrayed. 10 days after the assault, on May 15, 1884, Judge Richard Reid walked into his office. He was 45 years old. There, alone, he made a decision that would echo through Kentucky history. He took his own life. The reaction was immediate, and strangely, it changed everything. The same newspapers that had questioned his courage now wrote of his honor. Bar associations passed formal resolutions mourning his death. They described him as a man devoted to law, faith, and principle. But praise after death cannot lift the weight a man carried while he lived. And in those final days, the pressure must have felt unbearable. After the tragedy, Reid's widow made a decision that would shape how history remembered him. She commissioned a monument, not a modest grave marker. A towering statue of bronze and granite placed high in Machpelah Cemetery, overlooking the town. The inscription reads, Richard Reid, October 3, 1838, May 15, 1884. A martyr to law and religion, and beneath it, erected by his wife, who has given to the world the history of his noble life, cruel betrayal, and tragic death. Those words are not accidental. They are a defense. A widow reclaiming her husband's story, declaring that a man who chose law over violence had been destroyed by the very culture that demanded blood. But there is one final detail that continues to stir curiosity. The statue does not face Mount Sterling. It faces the horizon, away from the town he served, the town that watched his humiliation, the town that debated whether he was brave or weak. Some later stories claimed the statue turned on its own, but historians have never found evidence of that. The truth is simpler, and perhaps more haunting. The statue simply stands there, pen in hand, history beneath his feet. looking away from the town that could not decide whether he was a coward or a martyr. Mount Sterling moved on. The courthouse still stands, the streets filled again with people going about their lives. But high above the town, Judge Richard Reid remains, frozen in bronze, a man who chose the law when the world demanded violence, and in the end, he left them with nothing. No revenge, no duel, no final speech, just silence. And sometimes, silence is the heaviest legacy a man can leave behind. Have you ever heard the story of Judge Richard Reid before? And after hearing it, what do you believe? Was he a man of rare discipline who refused to answer violence with violence, or was he crushed by a cruel honor culture that ruled Kentucky in his time? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Kentucky Melody for more true stories from Kentucky's forgotten past. Because in the bluegrass, history does not sleep easy. It survives in old courtrooms, fading records, broken reputations, and tragedies that still cast a shadow long after the people are gone. And the deeper you go into Kentucky's past, the darker the story often becomes.